Open this safe and my $200 million is yours." The billionaire CEO mocked the black Maid's son, and then he did it in 60 seconds. Sometimes the children we dismiss carry gifts we can't imagine. And sometimes one moment of courage can change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let's continue. The study smelled of expensive whiskey and desperation. Wells Stevenson's mansion had seen many things over the years. Lavish parties, closed-door business deals, the silent suffering of staff members who kept it running. But nothing like this. 6 days of failure. 6 days of watching his carefully constructed empire threaten to collapse because he couldn't remember a combination he'd created himself. It was 2:47 p.m. when everything changed. Wells stood in the center of his study, surrounded by the best safe specialists money could hire. The Waldas Ultra Safe, towering and impenetrable, mocked him with its silence. This was supposed to be his protection, his fortress against a world he didn't trust. Now it was his prison. In desperation, fueled by alcohol and panic, Wells made an offer that would destroy him, $200 million to anyone who can crack this safe. The technicians stopped working, stunned. But in the corner, barely noticed by anyone, sat 10-year-old Malachi Dillon. Small for his age, wearing his favorite cartoon shirt and clutching the straps of his backpack. The son of Paige, the housekeeper who'd cleaned Wells's mansion for a decade. The boy Wells had belittled and degraded with racist comments since the day he first came to work with his mother. Malachi knew the combination. He'd seen Wells open it 6 nights ago, had watched with his remarkable photographic memory as the drunk billionaire spun the dials, laughing at his own genius. But Malachi had learned to be invisible. Wells had taught him that. Every slur, every dismissive glance, every cruel comment about these people and their kind. Until this moment. "Excuse me, Mr. Stevenson," Malachi said softly, stepping forward. "Can I try?" The room froze. Every head turned toward the small black boy standing in the corner. Wells's face went from shock to recognition to something darker. That look, the one Malachi knew too well, the look that said he didn't belong, that he had no right to even speak in this space. But before we see what happens next, you need to understand how we got here. You need to know who Wells Stevenson really is, who Malachi and his mother Paige are, and what led to this moment. Because this isn't just a story about a locked safe. This is a story about years of silent suffering, about racism disguised as normal behavior, about a child learning to be invisible in his own skin. Let me take you back. Back to when this safe was first installed, back to when Paige first brought her son to work during school break, back to the building hatred and the quiet brilliance that would collide in 60 seconds. This is how it all began. 6 months earlier. Wells Stevenson had always been obsessed with control. At 48 years old, overweight and perpetually suspicious, he'd built his billion-dollar empire on the principle that trust was a luxury only fools could afford. His estate sprawled across 12 acres of manicured lawns, protected by 15-foot iron gates, motion sensors, and security cameras that captured every angle. Inside the mansion, marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Every piece of furniture cost more than most people earned in a year. Every painting on the walls was authenticated, insured, and alarmed. But it wasn't enough. "I don't trust anyone," Wells told the 3 Swiss safe manufacturers sitting across from him in his private study. "Not my executives, not my family, not the people who clean my toilets." The manufacturers exchanged glances. They'd flown in from Zurich specifically for this consultation, bringing catalogs of their most sophisticated models. Each safe they presented was state-of-the-art. Biometric locks, time delay mechanisms, seismic sensors. Wells rejected them all. "Too standard," he said, waving dismissively. "If you can make 10 of them, someone can crack one of them. I want something unique. One of a kind. No blueprints. No duplicates. No bypass codes. No manufacturer override. Nothing." The lead manufacturer, a precise man with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "Mr. Stevenson, what you're describing is extraordinarily expensive. And if you forget the combination—" "I won't forget," Wells interrupted. I have a perfect memory. What I need is a safe that's completely impenetrable. Something designed so that thieves, domestic workers, even armed robbers holding me at gunpoint can't access what's inside. Can you do that or not? The manufacturer paused, then nodded slowly. We can. But understand, there will be no backup access. If something goes wrong, we cannot help you. Wells smiled. Perfect. 3 months and $300,000 later, the Waldes Ultra arrived. Resistance Class 7, the highest security rating available. It stood nearly 6 feet tall, constructed from bulletproof steel alloy with a complex mechanical lock system that required no electronics, no codes, no keys. Just a series of precise dial rotations in a specific sequence that only Wells would know. The day it was installed, Wells stood in his study watching the technicians bolt it to the reinforced concrete floor. Through the doorway, he could see members of his household staff going about their duties. His executive assistant hurried past with files. His driver polished the fleet of luxury cars in the garage. And Paige, his housekeeper, pushed a cleaning cart down the hallway, her movements efficient and invisible. Paige had worked for Wells for nearly 10 years. She was 38, soft-spoken, and unfailingly punctual. Wells barely noticed her most days, which was exactly how he preferred it. Staff were meant to be invisible, to anticipate needs without being seen or heard. When the installation crew finally left, Wells locked his study door. He approached the safe with the reverence others might reserve for a religious artifact. This was his fortress. His protection against a world that wanted to take what was his. He spent an hour testing the mechanism, spinning the dials in the pattern he'd memorized. Left 3 complete rotations stopping at 47, right 2 complete rotations stopping at 23, left 1 rotation stopping at 91, then right to 15. Click. The heavy door swung open smoothly. Inside, Wells began placing his most valuable possessions. Bearer bonds worth $40 million. Stacks of cash in multiple currencies. Another $15 million. Offshore account information for holdings in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. Corporate documents that could destroy competitors if leaked. Sensitive files that certain regulatory agencies would find very interesting. And insurance policies, real estate deeds, cryptocurrency access codes. Everything that mattered, everything that represented his power and wealth, went into that safe. As he closed the door and spun the lock, Wells felt a surge of satisfaction. This was it. The perfect defense. No one could touch him now. Not his business rivals who'd love to see him fall. Not his estranged brother who kept demanding a share of the family inheritance. Not the parade of ex-wives and their lawyers. And certainly not the staff who moved through his home like shadows. Wells poured himself a whiskey, savoring the burn. Through the window, he watched the sun set over his estate. 12 acres of absolute control. A mansion worth $18 million. A safe that was truly impenetrable. He was untouchable. Or so he thought. What Wells didn't know, couldn't have predicted, was that 6 months later, his perfect fortress would become his perfect prison. That his paranoia would trap him as effectively as it was meant to trap others. And that the person who would ultimately unlock his safe, and in doing so unlock all his secrets, would be someone he'd never considered worthy of notice. Someone he'd dismissed, degraded, and underestimated from the very first moment they met. But that revelation was still 6 months away. For now, Wells stood in his study, whiskey in hand, admiring his fortress of steel and his empire of wealth, completely unaware that empires built on arrogance and contempt have a way of crumbling from within. The safe was locked. The fortune was secure. Paige Dillon's alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., the same time it had every weekday for the past 10 years. She rose in the darkness of her small apartment, moving quietly so as not to wake Malachi, who was curled under his thin blanket in the bedroom they shared. But this morning, like every morning for the past week, she had to wake him. "Baby, time to get up," she whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. Malachi stirred, rubbing his eyes. School was on spring break, and the after-school program he usually attended was closed for renovations. Paige had no family nearby, no friends who could watch him during her 12-hour shifts. She'd called every babysitter she could afford. None were available. So Malachi came to work with her. By 5:45 a.m., they were pulling up to the service entrance of the Stevenson estate in Paige's 15-year-old sedan. The mansion loomed before them, lit by security lights that made the white stone exterior glow against the pre-dawn sky. Malachi pressed his face to the window, clutching his worn backpack with his homework and library books inside. "Remember what I told you," Paige said softly, her hand on his shoulder. "Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Stay out of Mr. Stevenson's way. Don't touch anything. Don't ask questions. Just sit in the break room and read your books. Can you do that for Mama?" Malachi nodded, though his eyes were wide with curiosity. To him, the mansion was like a museum. Everything inside was shiny and untouchable, from the crystal vases in the hallways to the leather-bound books in the library. Even the air smelled expensive, like furniture polish and fresh flowers that cost more than their weekly groceries. Paige moved through the mansion with practiced efficiency. She knew every room, every surface, every expectation. She started in the kitchen, preparing the coffee maker for the chef who'd arrive at 7 a.m. Then she moved to the main living areas, dusting, straightening, ensuring everything was perfect before Wells woke. Malachi followed her like a shadow, watching everything. He sat in corners with his books, his eyes tracking his mother's movements, noting how she worked twice as hard to remain invisible. How she never made eye contact with the few other staff members who passed through. How she flinched whenever she heard footsteps approaching. On the third day, Wells saw him. Malachi was sitting in the staff break room, a small windowless space near the kitchen with a table, a microwave, and a water cooler. He'd finished his math homework and was reading a library book about space exploration, his legs swinging from a chair too tall for him. His cartoon character t-shirt, bright with colors, stood out against the sterile white walls. Wells appeared in the doorway, mid-conversation on his phone. He stopped when he saw Malachi, his eyes narrowing. "Paige!" he called out sharply. Paige appeared within seconds, her face carefully neutral. "Yes, Mr. Stevenson? What is this?" Wells gestured at Malachi as if he were an object left out of place. "My son, sir. School is closed this week, and I have no one to watch him. I apologize for the inconvenience. He won't be any trouble." Wells looked Malachi up and down with obvious distaste. "I don't run a daycare. Keep him out of my way. And tell him not to touch anything. You know how these kids are." The words hung in the air. Malachi's grip tightened on his book, but he said nothing. "Yes, sir," Paige whispered. "It won't happen again." Over the following days, Wells made his feelings abundantly clear. When he passed Malachi in the hallway, he'd mutter loud enough to be heard, "Having the helps kids running around. What's next? Letting them eat at my table." When Malachi quietly carried his mother's cleaning supplies, Wells commented to his assistant, "Watch your wallet around that one. You know how they are." The worst came on the 5th day. Malachi was reading in the staff break room again, this time working through a book on advanced mathematics that his teacher had given him. Mrs. Patterson had said he was gifted, that his ability to remember everything he read was extraordinary. But his underfunded public school had no programs for students like him, no resources to nurture his talents. Wells walked in to grab bottled water from the refrigerator. He glanced at Malachi's book and laughed. "Advanced math. That's cute." He unscrewed the cap on his water bottle. Someone should teach these kids to aim lower, not fill their heads with ideas. You know what happens when people try to be something they're not. Disappointment. He walked out, leaving Malachi staring at the pages he could no longer see clearly through the tears forming in his eyes. When Paige found him 10 minutes later, she knew something had happened. She pulled him into her arms in the small break room, away from cameras and prying eyes. "What did I tell you, baby? Stay invisible. He can't hurt what he can't see." "But Mama, why does he talk to us like that? I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, baby. I know." Paige's voice cracked, but she held herself together. "Some people just have hate in their hearts. But we need this job. We need the money for rent, for food, for your school supplies. So we smile, we stay quiet, and we survive. You understand." Malachi nodded against her shoulder. He understood more than she wanted him to. He understood that in Wells's world, they were less than human. Objects to be used and dismissed. But what Paige didn't fully realize was the gift her son possessed. Malachi remembered everything. 3 days earlier, he'd overheard Wells on the phone with his lawyer, discussing offshore accounts. Malachi could repeat the conversation word for word. 2 days ago, he'd watched the security technician input a code on a side door panel. Malachi knew the 6-digit sequence without trying. His mind worked like a camera, capturing details others missed and storing them permanently. Patterns, numbers, conversations, movements. Nothing was too small or insignificant for his photographic memory to record. His teachers had noticed during parent conferences. Mrs. Dillon, Malachi is exceptional. He can recall entire pages of text after reading them once. He solves complex problems by remembering similar patterns. This is a rare gift. But what good was a rare gift in a school with broken computers, outdated textbooks, and teachers stretched so thin they could barely manage their overcrowded classrooms? What good was brilliance when the world had already decided you didn't matter? That evening, as the sun set over the estate, Malachi helped his mother clean. He pushed the vacuum cleaner in the upstairs hallway while Paige changed linens in the guest bedrooms. He wiped down surfaces in the bathroom, careful not to leave streaks. He watched everything with intense focus, his mind recording details. The paintings on the walls, the pattern of the crown molding, the way light filtered through the stained glass window at the top of the stairs. At 8:47 p.m., they heard the sound of a car pulling up the circular driveway. Through the window, Malachi saw Wells's driver helping the billionaire out of a black luxury sedan. Wells was stumbling, laughing too loud, his expensive suit rumpled. The charity gala had clearly involved an open bar. "Quickly, baby," Paige whispered urgently, gathering her cleaning supplies. "We need to stay out of his way when he's like this." They moved to an adjacent sitting room, Paige continuing to dust while Malachi sat quietly on the floor near the doorway. They could hear Wells stumbling through the foyer, his voice booming as he dismissed his driver. "Wonderful evening. Wonderful. They gave me an award, you know. Community leadership. Ha! If they only knew." His footsteps grew louder, unsteady. Malachi watched through the partially open door as Wells made his way toward his private study. The billionaire was talking to himself, pulling off his tie, his words slurring together. "My fortress. My beautiful fortress. Let me check on my treasure." Wells disappeared into his study. Malachi could see a sliver of the room through the gap. His mother was in the sitting room behind him, focused on her work, trying to finish so they could leave. But Malachi watched. And what he saw in the next few minutes would change everything. He watched Wells approach the massive safe. Watched him laugh and spin the dials, performing for an audience of one. Watched the precise movements. Left 3 times, right twice, left once, right again. Watched the safe open, watched Wells peer inside at his treasures, watched him close it again. And Malachi's photographic memory captured every detail, every rotation, every number the dial passed. Stored it perfectly, permanently, like a photograph that would never fade. Wells stumbled to his leather couch and collapsed, passing out within seconds. "Malachi, come on baby. We're done," Paige whispered from behind him. Malachi stood, shouldering his backpack. He said nothing about what he'd seen. He'd learned to be silent, to be invisible, to keep his observations to himself. They left through the service entrance, the mansion's lights dimming behind them as they drove home through the dark streets. In the car, Paige asked if he was okay. Malachi looked out the window at the passing streetlights, the combination still vivid in his mind. "I'm okay, Mama." But he wasn't okay. None of this was okay. Wells Stevenson had never felt more invincible than he did that night. The charity gala had been a triumph. 500 of the city's elite had gathered at the Grand Regency Hotel, and Wells had been the guest of honor. They'd given him an award for philanthropic leadership, a crystal trophy that now sat in the back seat of his car. He'd made a speech about giving back to the community, about responsibility and compassion. The applause had been thunderous. It was all performance, of course. Wells donated to charities for the tax breaks and the networking opportunities. But standing on that stage, bathed in spotlight and admiration, he'd felt like a king. 6 glasses of champagne and 3 whiskeys had only amplified the feeling. Now, at 10:30 p.m., alone in his study with the door partially ajar, Wells poured himself another drink from the crystal decanter on his desk. His jacket was draped over his chair, his tie loosened, his shirt untucked. The mansion was quiet around him, most of the staff long gone. Only Paige remained, finishing her evening duties before heading home. Wells raised his glass to his reflection in the darkened window. "To me," he said with a laugh. "Community leader. Philanthropist. Genius." The word genius made him think of his safe. His beautiful, impenetrable fortress. He turned to look at it, standing against the far wall like a monument to his paranoia and brilliance. In his intoxicated euphoria, he felt a sudden urge to admire it up close, to commune with his greatest achievement. "Nobody can crack this," he said to himself, walking unsteadily toward the massive steel structure. "Nobody even knows how it works. Not the manufacturers, not the experts, not anyone. Just me." He ran his hand along the cool metal surface, feeling the precision of its construction. The Waldis Ultra. Resistance Class 7. $300,000 of pure security. In the hallway outside, Malachi moved silently. He'd been dusting the picture frames along the corridor, working his way toward the main staircase where his mother was vacuuming the runner. The study door was open just enough for him to see inside, and he'd frozen when he heard Wells's voice. Stay invisible, his mother had taught him. Don't let him see you. Malachi pressed himself against the wall, dust cloth still in his hand. Through the gap in the doorway, he could see Wells standing before the safe, swaying slightly. "You know what?" Wells said, talking to the safe as if it were a person. "You deserve a performance. A demonstration of genius." He giggled, a sound that seemed wrong coming from a man his size and age. Then he stepped up to the dial, his fingers hovering over the metal wheel. "The perfect pattern. The only pattern. My pattern." Malachi watched, barely breathing. His photographic memory engaged automatically, the way it always did when something caught his attention. His mind became a camera, recording every detail with perfect clarity. Wells gripped the dial and began to turn it. "Left," he narrated to himself, spinning the wheel. 3 complete rotations. Past the numbers, around and around. Then stop at 47. See, 47. That's the year my father died. The year I inherited everything. The dial clicked softly as it settled on the number. Malachi's eyes tracked every movement. Left 3 times. Stop at 47. His mind recorded it like a photograph, sharp and permanent. "Now right," Wells continued, his words slurring slightly. 2 complete rotations. Around twice. Stop at 23. That's my lucky number. Won my first poker game with pocket 3s. Right 2 times. Stop at 23. Then left again. Just once this time. 1 rotation. Stop at 91. That's the year I started my company. Best decision of my life. Left 1 time. Stop at 91. And finally, Wells said with dramatic flair, right to 15. 15. The number of millions I made on my first deal. Beautiful, isn't it? A combination that means something. That tells my story. Right to 15. There was a soft mechanical click, deeper than the others. Wells grabbed the handle and pulled. The massive door swung open smoothly, revealing the safe's interior. Even from his position in the hallway, Malachi could see stacks of papers, bundles of currency, leather folders. "My treasure," Wells said, his voice full of satisfaction. "All mine. Protected. Safe. Untouchable." He stood there for a moment, admiring his hoard like a dragon surveying its gold. Then he laughed again and began to close the door. "Now we lock it back up," he said, spinning the dial. "Reverse the sequence. Add the final spin. That's the secret. You have to know both patterns, opening and closing." "Brilliant, really. I'm brilliant." Malachi watched Wells perform the locking sequence, his mind recording the reverse movements with the same precision. The sequence was now burned into his memory like a brand, every number, every rotation, permanently stored. Wells stepped back from the safe, stumbled, and nearly fell. He caught himself on the edge of his desk, knocking over a pen holder. Pens scattered across the polished wood surface, and some clattered to the floor. "Whoops," he said, laughing at himself. He made no move to pick them up. Instead, he turned toward the leather couch against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. He collapsed onto it face first, one arm dangling to the floor, his expensive shoes still on his feet. Within seconds, his breathing deepened into the heavy rhythm of unconscious sleep. Malachi remained frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding. He'd just witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. Something Wells would never have shown anyone while sober. The combination to the impenetrable safe. The secret Wells guarded above all else. And Malachi knew it now. Knew it completely. Left 3 times to 47, right twice to 23, left once to 91, right to 15. The pattern was etched into his mind with perfect clarity, as permanent as his own name. He heard his mother's footsteps on the stairs, the vacuum cleaner going silent. Quickly, quietly, Malachi continued dusting the frames, moving away from the study door. By the time Paige appeared at the top of the staircase, he was several feet down the hallway, working as if nothing had happened. "Almost done, baby?" Paige asked softly, wrapping the vacuum cord. "Yes, Mama." They finished their work in silence, gathering supplies, checking that everything was in order. Through the open study door, they could hear Wells snoring on his couch. Paige glanced in, her face expressionless, then guided Malachi toward the service staircase. They left through the kitchen entrance, the cool night air a relief after the mansion's recycled atmosphere. Paige's sedan sat alone in the staff parking area, looking shabby under the security lights. She unlocked it with a key that stuck in the door, a problem she couldn't afford to fix. As they pulled out through the service gate, Malachi pressed his face against the window, looking back at the mansion. All those rooms, all that space, all that wealth behind those walls. And inside, a man passed out drunk, protected by gates and cameras and a safe that he thought made him invincible. "You okay, baby?" Paige asked, her eyes on the road. Malachi turned away from the window. His mother looked tired, her shoulders slumped, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She'd worked 12 hours today, just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. Cleaning up after a man who treated her like she was invisible at best, vermin at worst. "I'm okay, Mama," he said quietly. But he wasn't okay. He had a secret now, information that Wells would never want anyone to have. The combination to his fortress. The key to his treasure. And Malachi didn't know what to do with it. So he said nothing. He looked out the window as they drove through streets that grew progressively dimmer, buildings that grew progressively smaller. Away from the estates and gated communities, through middle-class neighborhoods, into the area where rent was affordable and dreams were practical. 23 minutes later, they pulled into the parking lot of their apartment complex. The building was old but maintained, with peeling paint on the exterior and a lobby door that didn't always lock properly. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor, a one-bedroom with a leaky bathroom faucet that the landlord kept promising to fix. Paige parallel parked between a pickup truck and a sedan missing its rear bumper. She turned off the engine, and for a moment they sat in silence. Through the windshield, they could see laundry hanging on balconies, the flicker of television screens through thin curtains, the glow of a corner store sign advertising cigarettes and lottery tickets. This was home. Small and worn, but home. The contrast to Wells's mansion was stark and painful. 12 acres versus 800 square feet. Crystal chandeliers versus a ceiling fan that rattled. A custom safe holding $200 million versus a checking account that barely covered groceries. "Come on," Paige said softly, gathering her purse. "School tomorrow, even if it's break. You got reading to do." They climbed the stairs together, Malachi's backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Inside their apartment, Paige made them sandwiches for a late dinner while Malachi sat at their small kitchen table, his library book open in front of him. But he couldn't focus on the words. His mind kept returning to that study, to Wells stumbling before the safe, to the sequence of numbers and rotations now permanently etched in his memory. Left 3 times to 47. Right twice to 23. Left once to 91. Right to 15. He didn't know why it mattered. Didn't know that in 6 days, this secret would become the most important thing in his life. Didn't know that the drunken dance he'd witnessed would set in motion events that would change everything. For now, he was just a 10-year-old boy eating a sandwich in a small apartment, carrying a secret he didn't ask for, trying to be invisible in a world that had already decided he didn't matter. Wells Stevenson woke to the sound of his phone screaming on the nightstand. Sunlight stabbed through the gaps in his bedroom curtains like knives. His head felt like it was splitting open, his mouth tasted like something had died in it, and his entire body ached from sleeping in his clothes on the study couch. He grabbed the phone without looking at the screen. "What? Mr. Stevenson, where are you?" His assistant's voice was sharp with panic. "The merger team has been waiting in the conference room for 20 minutes. They flew in from California specifically for this meeting. They need the Henderson files, the offshore account documentation, the everything you said you'd have ready." Wells sat up too quickly. The room tilted. "What time is it?" 9:30. The meeting was scheduled for 9. "Sir, these people are not happy. Mr. Henderson himself is here. The Henderson merger. 6 months of negotiations. A $400 million deal that would expand his company into 3 new markets. The documentation was critical, time-sensitive, legally required for today's signing. And it was all in the safe. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," Wells said, his voice hoarse. "Something came up. A security issue. Sir, they're already talking about walking away. Mr. Henderson said if we're not professional enough to honor our commitments." "I said I'll handle it." Wells ended the call and stumbled toward his study, still wearing yesterday's rumpled suit. The safe stood against the wall, exactly where it had been last night. Solid, impenetrable, mocking him. Wells's hands shook slightly as he approached it. The hangover made his head pound, but underneath the physical pain was something worse. A creeping sense of wrongness. He'd opened this safe hundreds of times. He knew the combination by heart. Didn't he? He gripped the dial and tried to remember. Left first. That much he knew. But how many rotations? 3. Or was it 2? And what was the first number? 40-something. 47? 49? He spun the dial left 3 times, stopped at 47, then tried right twice to 23. Left to 91. Right to 15. He pulled the handle. Nothing. The safe remained locked, silent, indifferent to his pulling. Wells felt a flutter of panic in his chest. He tried again, more carefully this time. Left 3 times to 47. Right twice to 23. Left once to 91. Right to 15. Pull. Nothing. "No, no, no," he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. Maybe he'd miscounted the rotations. Maybe it was left twice first, then right 3 times. Or was the first number 49 instead of 47? He tried variation after variation. His head pounded with each attempt. The numbers blurred together. Was it 23 or 32? Was it 91 or 19? Had he turned left or right first? An hour passed. Then another. His phone kept ringing. His assistant. The merger team. His lawyer. He ignored them all. By noon, Wells had filled 3 pages with attempted combinations, crossing out each failed sequence with increasingly violent strokes. None of them worked. The safe remained sealed, his fortune and his critical documents locked inside. He called his assistant back. "Cancel everything. All meetings. All calls. Tell Henderson we'll reschedule." "Sir, Henderson is furious. He's saying the deal is off unless we produce the documentation by end of business today. The legal team says we're in breach of." "I said cancel everything," Wells shouted, then ended the call. He stared at the safe, his breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. He'd designed this safe specifically to be impenetrable, and now it was impenetrable to him. His own paranoia had trapped him. By evening, Desperate and exhausted, Wells found the contact information for the Swiss manufacturer. His hands shook as he dialed the international number. Waldis Security Systems. How may I direct your call? I need to speak to someone about a custom safe. This is Wells Stevenson. I purchased a Resistance Class 7 unit 6 months ago. There was a pause, some clicking of keyboards. One moment, Mr. Stevenson. Wells was transferred twice before reaching the lead engineer who'd overseen his safe's construction. Mr. Stevenson, good evening. How can I assist you? I need the backup combination for my safe. Or the override code. Or whatever failsafe you built in. Another pause. Sir, you specifically requested no backup access of any kind. You signed documentation waiving all manufacturer support for lock recovery. We honored that request. We destroyed all records per your explicit instructions. Wells's voice rose. You're telling me there's no way to open this safe? Not without the combination you created, no sir. That was the entire point of your custom specifications. You wanted a safe that even we couldn't access. We built exactly what you asked for. But what if I forget the combination? Then the safe remains locked. We did discuss this possibility extensively during the design phase. You assured us you would never forget. Wells wanted to scream. What about drilling? Cutting through? Possible, but extraordinarily difficult and time-consuming. The safe is Resistance Class 7. It would take weeks, possibly months, and there's a high probability of damaging the contents. We can recommend specialists who send me their information. Wells ended the call and threw his phone across the room, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. He poured himself a whiskey with shaking hands. This was supposed to be impossible. He was supposed to be protected. Instead, he was trapped by his own creation. Day 2 began with Wells hiring the first team of safe specialists. 3 men arrived at dawn with equipment cases and professional confidence. They examined the safe for 2 hours, running acoustic sensors along its surface, using electromagnetic scanning devices, consulting technical manuals. The lead specialist, a gray-haired man named Donald, finally straightened up and removed his glasses. Mr. Stevenson, this is extraordinary craftsmanship. The locking mechanism is purely mechanical, no electronics to bypass. The steel alloy is military grade. Without the combination or the original blueprints, we're looking at months of work trying to crack this. And that's if we're lucky. What about cutting through it? Wells asked, the same question he'd asked the manufacturer. Possible, but it would take weeks and specialized equipment. Diamond-tipped drills, plasma cutters. And even then, there's no guarantee we wouldn't damage whatever's inside. The heat from cutting could destroy paper documents, melt computer drives. Wells felt his chest tighten. I need what's inside intact. It's critical business documentation. Donald nodded sympathetically. Then I strongly suggest you keep trying to remember the combination. That's your best option. They worked for 8 more hours, trying everything they knew. Acoustic methods to listen for the tumblers. Pressure sensors. Mathematical probability models. Nothing worked. By evening, they packed up their equipment and left, unable to help. Day 3 brought a second team, these ones younger, more aggressive in their methods. They set up laptops running cracking algorithms, positioned microphones against the safe's door, tried manipulation techniques that involved feeling for microscopic movements in the dial. Wells watched from his desk, drinking steadily. Whiskey in the morning, whiskey in the afternoon, whiskey in the evening. The alcohol didn't help him remember. It only made the panic worse, made his thoughts more scattered. His phone kept ringing with increasingly urgent messages. The Henderson deal had collapsed. A $400 million opportunity gone because he couldn't produce the documentation. His lawyers were warning about potential lawsuits. His CFO needed offshore account information for a tax audit. His board of directors wanted answers about his absence from critical meetings. And still the safe remained locked. Day 4. A third team. More equipment, more failed attempts. Wells stopped watching. He sat at his desk with his head in his hands, surrounded by pages of attempted combinations, empty glasses, and mounting desperation. Day 5. A fourth team. They brought equipment Wells didn't recognize, tried methods he didn't understand. None of it mattered. The safe was designed to be impenetrable, and it was living up to its design perfectly. By the evening of Day 5, Wells's study looked like a disaster zone. Equipment cases stacked in corners. Cables running across the floor. Laptops displaying failure messages. Tools scattered everywhere. And in the center of it all, the safe stood untouched, unmoved, uncracked. Wells was on his 6th whiskey when the 5th team arrived. These were the best, he'd been told. The most experienced safecrackers on the East Coast. If anyone could help him, it was them. Among them was Sasha Gates, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for cracking the impossible. She examined the safe with professional detachment, running her fingers along the dial, pressing her ear against the door, checking the hinges and the frame. "How long have you been locked out?" she asked. 5 days, Wells said, his voice rough with exhaustion and alcohol. "And you're sure you don't remember any part of the combination?" "I remember pieces. Numbers. But not the sequence. Not the rotations. Every time I think I have it, nothing works." Sasha nodded. The problem with mechanical locks like this is there's no backdoor, no electronic signature to trace. It's pure engineering. Beautiful, really. And impossible to bypass without the combination or months of work. "I don't have months." Wells's voice cracked. "I have business deals collapsing, audits coming, legal documents trapped in there. I need it open now." "Then you need to remember," Sasha said simply. She set up her equipment and began to work. Day 6 arrived. Wells hadn't slept properly in nearly a week. His business empire was suffering. Phone calls from angry partners, concerned board members, threatening lawyers. His absence from critical meetings was raising questions. His inability to produce essential documents was causing real damage. And still, nobody could open the safe. By 2 p.m. on Day 6, Sasha Gates had been working for 3 days straight. She'd tried everything in her considerable arsenal. Nothing had worked. She was taking a break, consulting with her team, when Wells poured himself another whiskey and felt something inside him break. His desperation had transformed into rage. Rage at the safe. Rage at himself. Rage at his own paranoid brilliance that had created this prison. He stood up, swaying slightly, and raised his glass toward the safe. Toward the specialists who'd failed. Toward the universe that was mocking him. "If anyone can crack this safe," he shouted, his voice thick with alcohol and fury, $200 million is theirs." The room went silent. Tools stopped moving. Conversations ceased. Every head turned toward him. One of the technicians spoke up, uncertain. "Sir, are you serious?" Wells, beyond caring about consequences, waved his glass dismissively. "Yes. $200 million. I don't care who does it. Just open the damn thing." The words hung in the air, witnessed by 12 professionals who would remember exactly what was said. And in the corner, sitting so quietly that nobody had noticed him, was a small figure in a cartoon character t-shirt. Malachi Dillon had been watching all day, fascinated by the experts and their equipment. His mother was cleaning in the adjacent room. And in his mind, burned with perfect clarity, was a sequence of numbers and rotations he'd witnessed 6 nights ago. A sequence that nobody else in the room knew existed. Wells's nightmare was about to become complete. But not in the way he expected. The study had become a war room. Equipment cases lined the walls. Cables snaked across the marble floor like mechanical veins. 3 laptops displayed complex algorithms on their screens, their fans humming in the tense silence. The air smelled of coffee, sweat, and Wells's expensive whiskey. Sasha Gates knelt before the safe, her ear pressed against the cold steel, her fingers delicately manipulating the dial. She'd been in this position, with brief breaks, for 3 days straight. Her back ached. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. But her reputation had been built on cracking the impossible, and she refused to admit defeat. Behind her, Two members of her team monitored the acoustic sensors, watching for any fluctuation that might indicate the tumblers aligning. A third team member reviewed probability matrices on his laptop, calculating potential combinations based on common patterns. None of it was working. Wells sat at his desk, slumped in his leather chair, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in his hand. It was 2:47 p.m. on day 6, and he looked like a man coming apart at the seams. His suit was wrinkled, the same one he'd been wearing for 2 days. His hair, usually meticulously styled, stuck up at odd angles. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly. His phone sat face up on the desk, message notifications stacking up like accusations. His lawyer had called 4 times in the past hour. His CFO had sent increasingly frantic emails. His board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss his fitness to lead the company. Everything was falling apart. The Henderson merger had collapsed completely, costing him not just the $400 million deal but his reputation in the industry. Word had spread that Wells Stevenson couldn't deliver on his commitments, that something was wrong with his operation. Partners were getting nervous. Investors were asking questions. And still, the safe remained locked. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his lawyer. Wells, the prosecution is threatening contempt charges if we don't produce the offshore documentation by Friday. That's 2 days away. Where are the files? Trapped in a $300,000 steel box, Wells thought bitterly. Trapped by my own genius. He drained his glass and poured another, his fourth of the afternoon. The whiskey burned going down but did nothing to ease the panic that had taken permanent residence in his chest. Anything? He asked Sasha, though he already knew the answer. She sat back on her heels, rubbing her temples. No. I've tried every manipulation technique I know. This lock is extraordinary. Whoever designed it knew exactly what they were doing. I designed it, Wells said with a laugh that had no humor in it. I told them exactly what I wanted. No backdoors. No overrides. Perfect security. Well, you got it. Sasha stood, her knees cracking. Perfect security means perfectly locked out when you lose the combination. One of her team members, a young man named David, looked up from his laptop. We could try a systematic approach, testing every possible combination mathematically. But we're talking about millions of potential sequences. At our current rate, it would take approximately 7 years. I don't have 7 years. Wells stood up too quickly, stumbling slightly. I don't have 7 days. His CFO's latest email flashed on his phone screen. He grabbed it, reading the message that made his stomach drop. Emergency board meeting called for Monday. Questions about your absence, your decision-making, your control of company assets. Investors want answers. This is serious, Wells. That was 3 days away. 3 days to prove he was still in control, still competent, still worthy of leading a billion-dollar empire. 3 days to open a safe that had defeated 5 teams of experts. Sasha was setting up for another attempt, adjusting her acoustic sensors, when Wells felt something inside him snap. The combination of whiskey, sleep deprivation, and mounting panic created a perfect storm of reckless desperation. He stood up, swaying slightly, and raised his glass toward the safe. His voice came out louder than he intended, rough and slurred. If anyone can crack this safe, $200 million is theirs. The room froze. Sasha's hand stopped mid-adjustment. David looked up from his laptop. The other technicians turned from their equipment, staring at Wells with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then David spoke, his voice cautious. Sir, are you serious? Wells waved his glass, whiskey sloshing over the rim. Yes. $200 million. I don't care who does it. I don't care how they do it. Just open the damn thing. He meant it. In that moment, drunk and desperate and watching his empire crumble, he would have promised anything to anyone who could solve his problem. The money in the safe was useless if he couldn't access it. His fortune was meaningless if his company collapsed. Better to lose $200 million than lose everything. Sasha stood slowly, her eyes narrowed. Mr. Stevenson, that's a substantial offer. If you're serious, You should put that in writing. Fine. Wells lurched toward his desk, nearly tripping over a cable. Whatever. Just open it. He grabbed a piece of his personal letterhead, uncapped a pen with shaking hands, and scrawled, $200 million to anyone who opens my safe. Wells Stevenson. He signed it with a flourish that looked more like a seizure, dated it, and threw the paper onto the desk. There. Witnessed by everyone in this room. Now open my safe. The technicians exchanged glances. The energy in the room shifted. What had been professional frustration became something else. Opportunity. They turned back to their equipment with renewed focus, speaking in low, urgent voices about approaches they hadn't tried yet. Sasha picked up the handwritten note, examined it, then carefully placed it on the desk where everyone could see it. She pulled out her phone and took a photograph of it. For the record, she said simply. Wells didn't care. He collapsed back into his chair, fresh whiskey in hand, and watched them work with the detached interest of someone who'd already accepted defeat. This was just theater now, one more failed attempt to add to the pile. What Wells didn't notice, what none of the focus technicians noticed, was the small figure sitting quietly in the corner of the room. Malachi Dillon had been there for hours, sitting cross-legged on the floor near a bookshelf, his worn backpack beside him. School was still on break. His mother was still bringing him to work. And Malachi had discovered that if he sat very still, very quiet, adults forgot he existed. He'd been watching the experts all day, fascinated by their equipment and methods. He'd seen them try acoustic sensors, electromagnetic scanners, mathematical algorithms. He'd watched them fail again and again, unable to crack what they couldn't understand. But Malachi understood. In his mind, clear as a photograph, was the sequence he'd witnessed 6 nights ago. Left 3 complete rotations to 47. Right 2 complete rotations to 23. Left 1 rotation to 91. Right to 15. He'd replayed it in his mind hundreds of times, the way his photographic memory replayed everything, perfect and permanent. For 6 days, he'd stayed silent about what he knew. Because that's what he'd been taught. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Don't speak unless spoken to. Wells had made it clear, in 100 cruel ways, that Malachi didn't belong in conversations with real people. That his kind didn't have anything valuable to contribute. But now, hearing the offer, something stirred in him. $200 million. Malachi didn't fully understand how much money that was. He knew it was more than his mother made in a lifetime of cleaning. More than their apartment complex probably cost. More than he could really imagine. But more than the money, something else pulled at him. The knowledge that he could help. That he possessed something these experts with their expensive equipment and prestigious reputations didn't have. The solution they'd been seeking for 6 days. In the adjacent sitting room, he could hear his mother vacuuming, the sound steady and familiar. Paige had checked on him twice in the past hour, making sure he was staying out of the way, staying invisible like she'd taught him. But what if invisible wasn't enough anymore? What if sometimes you had to be seen? Malachi's heart pounded. His palms were sweaty. Every instinct screamed at him to stay quiet, to not draw Wells's attention, to remain safely unnoticed in his corner. He remembered every cruel comment, every racial slur disguised as a joke, every look that said he was less than human. But he also remembered his mother's tired face. Her slumped shoulders after 12-hour days. The way she flinched when Wells raised his voice. The apartment with the leaky faucet and the rattling fan and the bills that were always somehow just barely paid. $200 million could change that. Could change everything. Malachi's hands gripped the straps of his backpack. His throat felt tight. He watched the technicians working, watched Wells drinking, watched the safe sitting there like a monument to failure. He knew he could open it. Knew it with absolute certainty. The combination was burned into his brain, permanent and precise. He could walk over there right now and have it open in 60 seconds. But should he? The internal struggle played out in his 10-year-old mind. Fear versus courage. Safety versus opportunity. The learned behavior of invisibility versus the possibility of being seen, truly seen, for what he could do. Wells said anyone. The word echoed in Malachi's memory. Anyone who could open the safe. He didn't say any adult. He didn't say any professional. He said anyone. And Malachi was anyone. Slowly, his legs trembling, Malachi stood up. The movement was small, almost imperceptible in the busy room. Nobody noticed at first. They were too focused on their equipment, their calculations, their failing attempts. Malachi took a small step forward, away from the safety of his corner. Then another step. His heart hammered so hard he thought everyone must be able to hear it. His mouth was dry. Every muscle in his body wanted to run, to sit back down, to disappear back into invisibility where it was safe. But he kept moving forward, one small step at a time, toward the safe and the man who had spent years teaching him he didn't matter. Toward the moment that would change everything. "Excuse me, Mr. Stevenson." Malachi's small voice cut through the mechanical hum of equipment. "Can I try?" The room froze. Sasha Gates's hand stopped mid-reach for her acoustic sensor. David looked up from his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The other technicians turned from their work, tools suspended in mid-air. Even the ambient noise seemed to pause, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Every head turned toward the corner where the voice had come from. Malachi stood there, small and trembling, his cartoon character t-shirt bright against the room's muted tones. His yellow hoodie was tied around his waist. His worn backpack still hung from one shoulder. He looked impossibly young, impossibly out of place among the professional equipment and exhausted experts. Wells stared at him, his whiskey glass halfway to his lips. For a moment, his alcohol-fogged brain struggled to process what he was seeing, what he was hearing. Then recognition dawned, and his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something uglier. He laughed. A cruel, loud sound that echoed off the walls. "The helps kid wants to play with my safe?" Wells set down his glass and turned to the technicians, his voice dripping with mockery. "Did you all hear that? This is what we've come to. What's next? Should we let him count my money too?" A few technicians shifted uncomfortably. David looked away. But Wells was just getting started, the alcohol and stress stripping away whatever thin veneer of civility he usually maintained. "Look at him," Wells continued, gesturing at Malachi with his glass. "Standing there in his little cartoon shirt like he's at a playground. This is a multi-million-dollar security system, boy. Not a toy. Not something for kids who probably can't even spell combination." Malachi flinched but didn't move. His hands gripped the straps of his backpack tighter. Wells's mockery escalated, his words growing sharper, more vicious. "Maybe we should check if anything's missing first. You know these people and their sticky fingers. Probably been casing my study for days, plotting with his mother. That's how they operate." The technicians exchanged glances. The discomfort in the room was palpable. Sasha Gates's jaw tightened, her hands curling into fists at her sides. But she stayed silent, watching. "I mean seriously," Wells continued, his voice loud and slurred. "This is what happens when you let the help bring their kids to work. They start getting ideas. Start thinking they belong in places they don't. Start touching things that aren't meant for them." From the adjacent room, Paige heard her son's name. She abandoned her vacuum cleaner and rushed through the doorway, her face already crumpling. When she saw Malachi standing in the center of the room with all eyes on him, tears started streaming down her face. "Malachi, baby, come with Mama," she said, her voice breaking. She reached for his hand. "Don't listen to him. Come on now." But Malachi pulled his hand back gently. He looked up at his mother with eyes that were scared but determined. Then he turned back to Wells, his voice quiet but steady. "You said anyone, Mr. Stevenson. You said $200 million to anyone who can crack it." Wells's face twisted with contempt. "Anyone? You think I meant you? You think I meant some welfare kid whose mother scrubs my toilets? Let me guess, your father isn't around to teach you how the world works, is he? Typical for your kind. No father, no sense, no place in conversations with actual professionals." Paige sobbed quietly, her hand over her mouth. Malachi's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't move. Sasha Gates had heard enough. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through Wells's tirade like a knife. Mr. Stevenson, you made a public offer. We all witnessed it. You signed a document. She gestured to the paper still sitting on the desk. Your exact words were, if anyone can crack this safe, $200 million is theirs. Those words were witnessed by 12 people in this room. Wells whirled on her, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. I meant actual people, not some. He caught himself before saying the slur fully, but everyone in the room knew what word was on the tip of his tongue. Not this kid. Not some ignorant child who probably doesn't even understand what $200 million means. Sasha's voice remained coldly professional, but her disgust was evident. You didn't specify qualifications. You didn't say any professional or any adult. Your exact words were anyone, and your signed document doesn't include any exclusions. Those 12 witnesses can testify to exactly what was said and what was written. The other technicians nodded slowly. David held up his phone. I recorded the audio of your offer, sir. For documentation purposes. It's very clear. Wells was trapped. His own words, his own desperate offer, had backed him into a corner. His ego, already bruised by 6 days of failure, couldn't handle the humiliation of admitting he'd been careless. And in front of these professionals whose respect he craved, he couldn't back down without looking even weaker than he already felt. He waved his glass dismissively, whiskey sloshing. Fine. Let the little brat try. When he fails, maybe he'll finally learn his place. Maybe his mother will finally teach him that some things aren't meant for people like them. He turned to Paige, his voice vicious. This is your fault. Filling his head with ideas. Making him think he can touch my property, be in my space. When this is over, we're going to have a serious conversation about boundaries. Paige was crying openly now, her whole body shaking. But Malachi stepped away from her, his small legs moving toward the safe. The technicians parted like water, creating a path. Some looked at him with pity, others with curiosity. Sasha Gates watched with an expression that was hard to read. Malachi approached the massive safe, and suddenly the scale of it became obvious. The safe was nearly 6 feet tall. The dial was positioned at chest height for an adult. For a 10-year-old boy, it was higher than his head. He stood on his tiptoes, stretching to reach the dial. His fingers barely grasped it. Behind him, his mother watched with her hands pressed to her mouth, her tears falling silently. Wells leaned against his desk with his arms crossed, smirking, waiting for the inevitable failure. Malachi closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw that night 6 days ago. Saw Wells stumbling into the study, laughing, drunk. Saw him approach the safe with that same arrogant confidence. Saw his hands on the dial, heard his voice narrating the movements. Left 3 complete rotations to 47. Right 2 complete rotations to 23. Left 1 rotation to 91. Right to 15. The memory was perfect, crystalline, as clear as if it were happening right now. His photographic memory didn't fade or blur. It captured and held information like a photograph that never aged. Malachi opened his eyes and reached for the dial. The room held its breath. His small hands began to move. Left, spinning the dial 3 complete times, the metal wheel smooth under his fingers. He counted silently, carefully. 1 rotation. 2. 3. Stop at 47. Wells's smirk faltered slightly. The number 47 meant something. But no, it was just coincidence. The kid was guessing. Right. 2 complete rotations. Malachi's tongue peeked out slightly as he concentrated, the way children do when focused. 1 rotation. 2. Stop at 23. The room was absolutely silent now. No equipment humming. No one moving. Just the sound of the dial turning and everyone's held breath. Left. 1 rotation this time. Malachi turned it carefully, his small hand steady despite his racing heart. Stop at 91. Sasha Gates leaned forward slightly, her professional interest peaked. Those were specific numbers. Not random attempts. The child was following a pattern. Right. The final movement. Malachi turned the dial to 15 and stopped. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Wells's smirk started to return. See, just a stupid kid making random guesses. This would teach him to click. The sound was soft but unmistakable. The internal mechanism engaging. The lock releasing. Malachi grabbed the handle with both hands and pulled. The massive steel door, weighing hundreds of pounds, swung open smoothly on its perfectly calibrated hinges. Inside, visible to everyone in the room, were stacks of bearer bonds, bundles of cash in multiple currencies, leather folders bulging with documents. Wells's treasure. His fortune. His secrets. All revealed by a 10-year-old black boy in a cartoon t-shirt. Elapsed time. 60 seconds. The silence that followed was absolute. Total. As if the world itself had stopped turning. Then chaos erupted. "Oh my God," David whispered, his laptop forgotten. "That's impossible," another technician breathed. Sasha Gates started laughing, a sound of pure amazement and vindication. He did it. The kid actually did it. Wells's whiskey glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Crystal fragments scattered across the white stone, whiskey spreading in a dark stain. His face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Shock. Disbelief. Confusion. Then something darker, something that had been building for 6 days of failure and humiliation. Pure rage. "That's impossible," Wells shouted, his voice cracking. "He cheated. That little." He stopped himself again, but barely. "Paige, you told him. You coached him. You've been plotting to steal from me this whole time." Paige, still crying, shook her head frantically. "Mr. Stevenson, I swear, I don't know the combination. Nobody does except you." "Liar!" Wells lurched forward, his coordination compromised by alcohol and shock. He grabbed Malachi roughly by his shirt, lifting the small boy off his feet. "How did you know? Did you break into my study? Did you install cameras? Tell me right now, you little thief." Malachi cried out in fear and pain, Wells's grip tight on his shirt, his feet dangling above the floor. "Mr. Stevenson, let go of my son." Paige tried to intervene, but Wells shoved her with his free hand. She stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard. "I saw you," Malachi sobbed, terrified. "That night, when you came home from the party. I was helping Mama clean, and you were playing with the safe. I just remembered what you did." "Liar!" Wells shook him violently, Malachi's head snapping back and forth. "Nobody has that kind of memory. Especially not some ignorant kid from the projects. You're trying to con me. This is theft. You and your mother planned this." Sasha Gates moved fast. She physically grabbed Wells's arm and pulled, her strength surprising. "Touch that child again, and I'm calling the police myself. Put him down. Now." When Wells didn't immediately comply, she twisted his wrist. The pain cut through his alcohol haze. He dropped Malachi, who collapsed to his knees, crying. Paige rushed forward and gathered her son in her arms, checking him for injuries, her whole body shaking with fear and rage and helplessness. "Some children have eidetic memory, Mr. Stevenson," Sasha said coldly, standing between Wells and the mother and child. "It's rare but not impossible. And this child just demonstrated it perfectly. While you assaulted him." She held up her phone, screen facing Wells. "I recorded everything. Your offer. Your racial slurs. Your assault of a 10-year-old child. And I'm not the only one." Around the room, other technicians held up their phones. David nodded. "I got it all." The realization hit Wells like cold water. 12 witnesses. Multiple recordings. His offer. His words. His violence. All captured. All documented. His nightmare had just become complete. Wells stood in the center of his study, staring at the open safe with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse. The realization was sinking in through the alcohol fog, cutting deeper than any hangover could reach. His fortress was breached. His secrets were exposed. And a 10-year-old child had done what 5 teams of experts couldn't do in 6 days. "I'm not paying," Wells suddenly roared, his voice raw with fury and desperation. "You think I'm going to give $200 million to him? To some welfare kid who probably can't even count that high?" He advanced on Malachi again, but Sasha Gates stepped between them, her body language making it clear she wouldn't hesitate to physically intervene again. "Mr. Stevenson, step back," she said, her voice steady but hard as steel. "This is my house. My safe. My money." Wells was nearly screaming now, spittle flying from his lips. "I don't care what I said. I was drunk. I was desperate. You think any court would hold me to a promise made to a child? To him." The words hung in the air, ugly and raw. The racism that Wells had disguised as jokes for years, hidden behind coded language and plausible deniability, was now on full display. His mask had shattered along with his whiskey glass. "You people are always looking for handouts," Wells continued, his face flushed. "Always trying to take what isn't yours. This is theft. This is a con." His mother probably coached him, probably told him the combination. They've been planning this for weeks, months maybe. These people are like that. Patient. Waiting for their moment to steal. David, still filming on his phone, spoke up. "Sir, you're making this worse for yourself." "Worse?" Wells laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "You think it can get worse? My safe is open. My business is falling apart. And now you're all standing here expecting me to pay a child $200 million because of some drunken promise? Get out. All of you. Get out of my house." The technicians began gathering their equipment, moving quickly but carefully. They exchanged glances, silent communication about what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't just about a safe anymore. This was something that would follow them, that they'd talk about for years. Wells turned his fury on Paige, who was still kneeling on the floor with Malachi in her arms. You're fired. Pack your things and get out. You and your criminal son are done here." Paige looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but something new in her eyes. Something that hadn't been there before. Not quite defiance, but no longer just fear. "You heard me," Wells shouted. 10 years of cleaning my house, and this is how you repay me? By teaching your son to rob me? By plotting against me? Mr. Stevenson, I don't want to hear it." He pointed toward the door, his hand shaking. "Get out. And don't expect a reference. Don't expect anything. I'm going to make sure no one in this city ever hires you again. I'm going to tell everyone what you tried to do, how you and your son tried to con me. You'll be lucky if you can get a job cleaning bathrooms at a gas station when I'm done with you." Paige stood slowly, pulling Malachi up with her. The boy was still crying, his face buried in his mother's side. She wrapped her arm around him protectively and began moving toward the door. Sasha Gates moved with them, her presence a shield. "Come on," she said quietly to Paige. "You don't have to listen to this." But Wells wasn't done. "That's right, run. Take your little thief with you. And when the police come asking questions about breaking and entering, about attempted theft, don't be surprised. I have lawyers. I have resources. You have nothing." The other technicians filed out, their equipment cases bumping against the doorframe. Some of them looked back at Wells with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. David was still recording, his phone capturing every word, every threat. As they moved through the study, past the open safe, Sasha Gates stopped. Her professional instincts, honed over decades of working with security systems and wealthy clients, kicked in. She looked at the contents of the safe, really looked, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Stacks of documents with offshore bank letterheads. Cayman Islands, Switzerland, British Virgin Islands. Bearer bonds in denominations that made no sense for legitimate business. Folders marked with names she recognized from news reports about money laundering investigations. And on top of one stack, partially visible, a spreadsheet showing 2 sets of numbers. Revenue figures reported to the IRS versus actual revenue. The difference was staggering. Sasha pulled out her phone and quickly snapped several photos. The open safe. The documents. The evidence laid bare. Behind her, David noticed what she was doing. He zoomed in with his phone camera, capturing clear images of the offshore account statements, the suspicious bearer bonds, the incriminating spreadsheets. Two other technicians, seeing what was happening, did the same. Phones came out. Camera shutters clicked silently. Evidence was captured and stored in the cloud, beyond Wells's reach. "What are you doing?" Wells shouted, suddenly realizing. "Stop! That's private property. That's privileged information." "That's evidence," Sasha said coldly, pocketing her phone. "Of what? I'm not entirely sure yet. But I'm bound by professional ethics to report certain things when I see them. And what I'm seeing in that safe looks a lot like financial fraud." Wells went pale. "You can't prove anything. Those are legitimate business documents." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Sasha replied. "But I know what I saw. And so do they." She gestured to the other technicians, all of whom had their phones out. The realization hit Wells like a physical blow. His safe wasn't just open. Its contents were photographed, documented, distributed across multiple devices. The secrets he'd worked so hard to hide were now in the hands of strangers who had every reason to be hostile toward him after what they'd just witnessed. "Get out," he said, his voice suddenly quiet, dangerous. "All of you. Get out before I call my lawyers." "Already planning to," Sasha said. She turned to Paige, who was standing in the doorway with Malachi. "Come on. You're riding with me. We need to talk." They left together, the technicians filing out behind them. Equipment cases, laptops, tools, and phones full of evidence that would destroy Wells Stevenson more thoroughly than any safecracker ever could. The study emptied quickly. The sound of footsteps echoed through the mansion, then faded. Car engines started outside. Vehicles pulled away down the long driveway. And Wells was alone. He stood in the center of his study, surrounded by the debris of 6 days of failure. Shattered glass on the floor. Empty whiskey bottles. Pages of attempted combinations scattered across his desk. Equipment cases left behind in the rush to leave. Cables still snaking across the marble. And the safe. His fortress. Standing open like a mouth screaming all his secrets to the world. Wells walked slowly to the safe and looked inside. His treasure. His protection. The thing he'd spent $300,000 and 6 months designing to keep him safe from everyone. Now it mocked him. Open. Violated. Its contents photographed by people who hated him. He thought about closing it, but what was the point? The damage was done. The combination was known. The secrets were out. Wells collapsed into his desk chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had fueled his rage was draining away, leaving only the crushing weight of consequences. He'd assaulted a child on camera. He'd made racist statements in front of witnesses. He'd refused to honor a legally binding offer he'd made and signed. And worst of all, he'd exposed the contents of his safe to people who knew what to look for. The offshore accounts. The tax evasion. The money laundering. The fraud that had built his empire. His phone sat on the desk, dark and silent. No more calls from his assistant, his lawyers, his CFO. It was after business hours now. They'd all gone home, unaware that their boss had just destroyed himself in less than an hour. Wells reached for the whiskey bottle, but his hand stopped halfway. More alcohol wouldn't help. Nothing would help now. Through the window, the sun was setting over his estate. 12 acres of perfectly manicured lawn. Gardens worth millions. Security systems that cost more than most people's houses. All of it designed to keep the world out, to keep him safe, to protect him from people he didn't trust. But he'd never protected himself from the one person who could actually hurt him. Himself. His own paranoia. His own arrogance. His own hatred. A 10-year-old boy had opened his safe in 60 seconds. But Wells Stevenson had been opening the door to his own destruction for years, one cruel comment at a time, one racist slur at a time, one assumption about his own superiority at a time. The safe was just the final lock clicking open. The real breach had happened long ago, in his heart, where he'd locked away his humanity and replaced it with contempt. Now everything was exposed. The money, the fraud, the hatred, all of it visible, documented, saved to the cloud where he couldn't reach it. Wells sat alone in his study as darkness fell, the open safe looming before him like a headstone marking the death of everything he'd built. His empire hadn't fallen yet, but the collapse had begun. And unlike his safe, there was no combination that could lock the damage back inside. The only question now was how fast and how far he would fall, and whether anyone would be there to witness his landing, or if he'd be as alone then as he was right now. Outside, in Sasha Gates's car, Paige held her son and stared at the mansion receding in the rearview mirror. Malachi had stopped crying, but his small body still shook against hers. "What happens now?" Paige whispered. Sasha's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her jaw set. Now we make sure that man pays for everything he's done. To you. To your son. To everyone." She glanced at her phone, sitting in the cup holder, full of evidence that would bring down a billionaire. "Now," Sasha said, "justice happens." Sasha Gates sat in her car outside a 24-hour diner, her laptop open on the passenger seat, her phone connected to the vehicle's hotspot. It was 11:47 p.m. Paige and Malachi had gone inside to get something to eat, the boy finally calm enough to be hungry. Sasha had told them she needed to make some calls. What she was actually doing was uploading videos. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose. She'd already edited the footage into a coherent narrative. Wells's drunken offer, captured clearly on audio. Malachi's polite request to try. Wells's racist mockery, every vile word preserved. The moment the safe opened. Wells's violent assault on a child. His refusal to honor his promise. The threats against Paige's livelihood. It was all there. 12 minutes of footage that told a complete story. Sasha uploaded it to 3 platforms simultaneously. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. She titled it simply, "Billionaire CEO offers $200 million to open safe, then assaults 10-year-old who succeeds." Then she texted the links to every journalist contact she had, every civil rights organization she knew, every lawyer friend who'd ever talked about fighting workplace discrimination. "This needs to be seen," she wrote. "Witness testimony available." She hit send and closed her laptop. Within 2 hours, the videos had 10,000 views. By 3 a.m., 100,000. By dawn, the number had crossed 2 million and was climbing exponentially. #PayMalachi began trending at 4:23 a.m. #JusticeForMalachi followed at 6:15 a.m. The footage was devastating in its clarity. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Viewers watched a small, polite 10-year-old boy solve an impossible problem in 60 seconds while enduring racial abuse. They watched him be grabbed, shaken, threatened. They watched his mother shoved into a wall. They watched a billionaire refuse to honor a legally binding promise specifically because of the child's race. The comment sections exploded with outrage. People shared their own stories of workplace racism, of being underestimated because of their skin color, of watching their children face discrimination. The video became more than just one incident. It became a symbol. By 8 a.m., major news outlets were picking up the story. CNN ran a segment. MSNBC brought in legal experts to discuss the binding nature of Wells's offer. Fox News covered it, though their commentary was more measured, questioning whether the video showed the full context. But the context was right there in the footage. 12 minutes of unedited reality. Civil rights organizations issued statements by mid-morning. The NAACP called for a full investigation into Wells's business practices. The National Action Network demanded prosecution for assault and enforcement of the contract. The ACLU offered free legal representation to Paige and Malachi. Then celebrities got involved. A Grammy-winning artist with 40 million followers shared the video with the caption, "This is America. A child solves the impossible and gets assaulted for it. This man needs to pay. Every dollar. #PayMalachi." A beloved actor tweeted, I watched this 3 times and I'm sick. This is why we can't stop talking about racism. It's not in the past. It's right here, on camera, happening to a 10-year-old. Hashtag justice for Malachi. The shares multiplied. The views climbed into the tens of millions. Wells Stevenson woke at 9:30 a.m. to his phone exploding with notifications. Calls from his board of directors. Emails from his corporate partners. Text messages from his PR team that escalated from concerned to panicked to desperate. He ignored them all and opened Twitter. His name was trending. Not just trending, but dominating the conversation. The video was everywhere. His face, red with alcohol and rage, was being screenshotted and shared. His words, his racist mockery, were being quoted in tweet after tweet. "Oh God," he whispered, his hangover suddenly the least of his problems. By 10 a.m., his business partners were calling emergency meetings. The CEO of Retail Max, Wells's largest distributor, held a press conference. "We are reviewing our relationship with Stevenson Enterprises in light of these deeply disturbing allegations. We do not tolerate racism or violence in any form." By noon, 3 major retailers had announced they were pulling his products from their shelves. Corporate partners were issuing statements distancing themselves from him. Investors were demanding explanations. By 2 p.m., protesters had gathered outside his estate. 50 people at first, then 100, then 200. They held signs, "Pay Malachi," "Black Excellence Matters," "Children Deserve Dignity." News vans lined the street outside his gates, reporters doing live broadcasts with his mansion in the background. More protesters gathered outside his corporate headquarters downtown. Office workers inside sent nervous texts to HR, asking if they should come to work tomorrow. Some started updating their resumes. But Wells's problems were about to get much worse. Federal investigators had seen the videos too. Not the social media posts, but the original footage that David and Sasha had sent to authorities. The footage that included clear shots of the safe's contents. The offshore account statements. The bearer bonds. The incriminating spreadsheets. Sasha had spent the morning on the phone with her lawyer, explaining what she'd witnessed. Then she'd been transferred to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Then to the IRS's Criminal Investigation Unit. "Yes," she told them, "I have photographs. Yes, I can testify to what I saw. Yes, I believe those documents show evidence of fraud." 72 hours after Malachi opened the safe, federal agents executed search warrants on Wells's properties. His mansion, his office, his vacation home in the Hamptons. They came with boxes and forensic accountants and a list of questions that made Wells's lawyer turn pale. What they found was worse than the glimpses captured in the videos. Detailed records of tax evasion spanning 15 years. Evidence of money laundering through shell corporations. Fraud in government contracts. Bribery of foreign officials. The custom safe had protected Wells's secrets for 6 months. Now those secrets were being cataloged, photographed, and prepared for prosecution. Wells's board of directors held an emergency meeting on day 4. Investors were threatening to pull funding. The stock price had dropped 40%. Lawsuits were being filed. The company's reputation was in free fall. They voted unanimously to demand Wells's resignation. When he refused, they voted to remove him as CEO. When his lawyer threatened to fight it, they showed him the evidence from the federal investigation and the terms of his employment contract's morality clause. Wells resigned that evening, his statement cold and brief, offering no apology and no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Meanwhile, in a small legal aid office across town, Page sat with Malachi as lawyers explained their options. They'd been overwhelmed with offers of representation. The ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, 3 major civil rights law firms, a coalition of employment discrimination attorneys. They chose the coalition. 5 lawyers working together, each specializing in a different aspect of what had happened. The lawsuits were filed within a week. Breach of contract for the $200 million offer, with Wells's signed document and 12 witnesses. Wrongful termination for Page, with evidence of 10 years of documented service and discriminatory treatment. Hostile work environment, with years of racist comments captured in text messages and emails that former staff members had saved. Assault of a minor, with video evidence so clear that criminal charges were also filed. Emotional distress for both Paige and Malachi, for years of degradation and abuse. Then something unexpected happened. Other former employees saw the news coverage and started coming forward. A former driver who'd been paid less than his white counterparts. A Latino maintenance worker who'd been passed over for promotion repeatedly while less qualified white employees advanced. A black executive assistant who'd endured years of racial comments disguised as jokes. Dozens of them. Then scores. All with similar stories. All with documentation. A class action lawsuit emerged, representing 67 former employees. The pattern was undeniable. Systematic discrimination in pay, promotion, and treatment. A corporate culture built on racism and enabled by Wells's power. The media coverage intensified. Wells became a symbol of everything wrong with corporate America. His case was discussed on cable news, dissected in think pieces, analyzed in academic papers about workplace discrimination. Wells tried to defend himself. His lawyers arranged an interview with a sympathetic journalist, hoping to control the narrative. It backfired spectacularly. The offer wasn't serious, Wells said on camera. It was made under duress, in a moment of desperation. The interviewer played the video of him signing the document, witnesses watching. The child must have been coached, Wells insisted. There's no other explanation. The interviewer cited 3 child psychologists who'd reviewed the footage and confirmed that eidetic memory was rare but real. I never assaulted anyone, Wells claimed. The interviewer played the video of him grabbing Malachi, shaking him, shoving Paige into the wall. Every answer made things worse. Every defense revealed more of his character. The interview was cut short when Wells walked out, calling the journalist biased and unprofessional. That clip went viral too. More evidence emerged. A former housekeeper came forward with recordings of Wells using racial slurs. A business partner shared emails showing Wells's discriminatory hiring practices. An ex-wife gave an interview describing his prejudices in their private life. The empire Wells had built over 30 years was collapsing in 30 days. His mansion, once a fortress of wealth and power, became a prison. Protesters outside the gates. Process servers delivering lawsuit notifications. Federal agents returning with more warrants. News helicopters circling overhead. Wells stood at his study window on day 28, looking out at the protesters, the media, the dismantling of everything he'd built. The safe behind him was still open, emptied now by federal investigators who'd cataloged every document, every bearer bond, every piece of evidence. His phone rang. His lawyer. The prosecution is offering a plea deal, the lawyer said, his voice tired. If you plead guilty to the tax evasion and fraud charges, they'll recommend 15 years instead of 25. And if I fight it, with the evidence they have, with your statements in that interview, Wells, you'll lose. And the sentence will be longer. Plus, the civil cases are going to destroy you financially regardless. The $200 million contract is ironclad. The assault charge has video evidence. The discrimination suits have documentation from dozens of plaintiffs. Wells closed his eyes. How did this happen? You tell me. You're the one who offered $200 million to a room full of witnesses. You're the one who assaulted a child on camera. You're the one who kept incriminating documents in a safe and then let that safe be opened in front of technicians with smartphones. Wells ended the call. He poured himself a whiskey, then stopped. Alcohol had caused this. Alcohol and arrogance and hatred that he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it wasn't normal. Outside, the protesters began a chant. Pay Malachi! Pay Malachi! Pay Malachi! The sound drifted up through the closed windows, through the security systems, through all his walls. Inescapable. Unending. Wells Stevenson stood alone in his study, watching his empire burn, and realized that sometimes the fortress you build to protect yourself becomes the tomb you die in. The reckoning had come. And it was absolute. 1 year later, Wells Stevenson stood before a federal judge in a courtroom packed with media, former employees, and people who'd never met him but felt they knew exactly who he was. They'd seen the video. Everyone had seen the video. The trial had taken 8 months. His lawyers, expensive and experienced, had tried every defense available. They argued the $200 million offer was made under duress. The judge reviewed the video and Wells's signed document, then ruled it a legally binding contract made in front of 12 witnesses. They claimed Wells never intended the offer to apply to a child. The prosecution played clips of him saying anyone repeatedly, with no qualifications or restrictions. They tried to minimize the assault. The video showed him grabbing a 10-year-old, shaking him violently, shoving the child's mother into a wall. Medical records documented bruising on Malachi's arms where Wells had gripped him. They attempted to separate the financial crimes from the discrimination. But the prosecutors wove them together masterfully, showing a pattern of behavior. A man who believed rules didn't apply to him, who thought his wealth and power placed him above consequences, who treated people as objects to be used or discarded based on their usefulness and their race. The hate crime enhancement was applied based on the documented pattern of racial discrimination. Years of text messages, emails, recorded conversations from multiple former employees. Wells's own words from the viral video, his racist mockery captured for the world to hear. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Page was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the question. The fear. The violence. The months of court proceedings and media attention. The way their lives had been turned inside out, examined, judged. But also the justice. The vindication. The 67 other families who'd found compensation and closure. The foundation helping others. The fact that Wells Stevenson could never hurt anyone else again. No, she said finally. I wouldn't have stopped you. Because staying silent was killing us slowly anyway. Every day of pretending his treatment was acceptable, of teaching you to be invisible, of accepting less than we deserved. That was its own kind of death. Speaking up was terrifying, but it led to justice. Not just for us, but for dozens of others who suffered the same way. Malachi nodded thoughtfully. What destroyed Mr. Stevenson wasn't really the safe or my memory, was it? No, baby. It was his own hatred. His inability to see value in you because of the color of your skin. His refusal to honor his word because he considered you beneath him. The safe was designed to protect him from the world, but he never protected himself from what was in his own heart. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then returned to their work. Paige to her nursing studies. Malachi to his mathematics. But Paige's mind wandered, thinking about the journey they'd traveled. From that small apartment with the leaky faucet to this house with its yard and its promise. From invisibility to visibility. From silence to speaking truth to power. She thought about all the other children out there right now, brilliant and gifted and dismissed because of their skin color. All the parents enduring abuse in silence, afraid to speak up because they need the job, need the income, need to survive. How many other Malachis were being told they didn't belong, that they should aim lower, that their kind would never amount to anything? How many other Pages were teaching their children to be invisible, to accept mistreatment, to survive by disappearing? The work of the foundation would continue. The fight against discrimination would go on. Because for every Wells Stevenson exposed and held accountable, others remained hidden, their prejudice protected by power and silence. But change was possible. Justice could prevail. Sometimes in 60 seconds, sometimes over 18 months of legal battles, but it could happen. Paige looked at her son, his head bent over his homework, his brilliant mind engaged with problems that challenged him. A child who could have been broken by hatred, but instead became a symbol of resilience and justice. I love you, baby, she said softly. Malachi looked up and smiled. I love you too, Mama. They returned to their studies, their quiet evening in their safe, warm home. A home built not on money alone, but on courage. On the decision to stand up and demand dignity. On the refusal to accept that some people matter less than others. Outside, the world continued turning. Somewhere, injustice was happening. Somewhere, someone was being told they didn't matter because of their race, their class, their circumstances. But also somewhere, someone was watching. recording, preparing to speak up, refusing to stay silent. The story of Wells Stevenson and Malachi Dillon would be told for years to come. In classrooms and boardrooms, in legal seminars and ethics courses. A reminder that power without compassion is tyranny. That wealth without humanity is worthless. That sometimes the people we dismiss possess exactly what we need. And sometimes, justice takes exactly 60 seconds to arrive. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it. The question, as always, remained, what will you do when you witness injustice? Will you stay silent, or will you speak up? Will you be the person who records the video, who offers legal help, who stands between an abuser and their victim? Or will you look away, assuming it's not your problem, not your fight, not your responsibility? Malachi Dillon chose courage. His mother chose to let him try. Sasha Gates chose to document and report. 67 former employees chose to come forward. Their collective choice brought down an empire built on hatred and exposed a system that allowed it to flourish. One choice. One moment. One small voice saying, "Can I try?" Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. The end of this story is not an ending. It's a beginning. For every family, the foundation helps. For every child who sees Malachi's example and refuses to accept limits placed on them by prejudice. For every person who witnesses discrimination and chooses to act instead of ignore. The safe is open now. Not Wells's safe, but the safe where society locks away uncomfortable truths about racism, discrimination, and inequality. The combination that opened it was courage, documentation, and the refusal to accept that some people are worth less than others. And once a safe like that is open, you can't close it again. The truth is out. The light is in. All that remains is the choice. Will we use what we've learned to build something better? Paige and Malachi believed the answer was yes. Their foundation was proof. Their lives were proof. And somewhere tonight, another child is watching, learning, gathering courage. Another 60 seconds is waiting to change everything. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.